Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, September the 14th, 2021. It's good to know that there are people already watching on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're taking a look at the last part of chapter 7, and then we're going to take a look at the first part of chapter 8. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get further along in my work today. I think it was Hezekiah that said that some days it is good that thou should not get out of thy cot, and today was one of those days. I made that up, incidentally. In chapter 7, starting at verse 14, Jesus is teaching in the courtyard at the temple. The temple of course, was in Jerusalem. It was a building in which worship and sacrifice was made. But outside, there was large areas all around where teachers could set up a spot and do itinerant preaching and teaching. And so this was common practice. People would come into the Temple Mount. They would find a teacher that they wanted to hear, or maybe they would sample a number of different teachers and stick with the one they like the best. So Jesus is doing that, and he says at one point, if anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? Then Jesus gets to his point. In chapter 5, Jesus heals a person on the Sabbath, and the people have been, or the temple leaders have been pretty upset about this because he broke the Sabbath law. Thou shalt not work on the Sabbath. So Jesus says this about that. You circumcise a child on the Sabbath. Now, if a child can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing the whole man on the Sabbath? So Jesus raises that issue. And finally, in John's Gospel, the narrative reads, the chief priests and Pharisees sent temple guards to arrest Jesus. And they come back in the next segment. So they have been sent out to arrest him. Some things about this passage that I'm alluding to, it's impossible to separate Jesus from what he says. He's pretty much defined by his teaching, and so to be angry with his teaching is to be angry with him. To be angry with him is to be angry with his teaching. At least that's what the commentators say about the gospel according to John. For John's gospel, the world's evil is revealed by its work and rejection of Jesus rather than personified in demonic possession. So the fact that the people are rejecting Jesus is a major problem in John's gospel. To the Jewish authorities, Jesus' healing appeared to be a violation of the Sabbath law. But in reality, when viewed with right judgment, this is what Jesus is talking about. What appears to you and your preference versus what is actually the reality and the truth. But in reality, when viewed with right judgment, it was a deepening fulfillment of the Sabbath. Jesus challenges the crowd to judge with discrimination, to look carefully at what one sees and not judge according to what one expects to find or assumes one sees. So the issue for John's gospel is what is the truth? Are we operating off of our preferences, our preconceived notions, our opinions, or are we operating off of reality and truth? In our culture today, the reality is everybody seems to operate off of their preferences and opinions, and my opinion is just as good as anybody else's opinion. And that is how the postmodern culture operates. But there are, according to this passage, there are truths that transcend opinions and impressions, and these truths are reality. The commentator also says in the broader gospel, When one sees a sign simply as a miracle, one judges by appearance, and when one sees the sign as revealing the presence and identity of God, one judges with right judgment. So when the two ways of looking, of course, at the chapter 5 of miracle is to either say that Jesus did a miracle or Jesus is revealed as a representative of God because of the miracle. So people are looking at, well, he did a miracle on the Sabbath. You can't do that. That's breaking the rules. And the other question becomes, who are the rules for? And what are the purpose of the rules? In this case, it's so that people aren't worked to death because they're working 7 days a week around the clock. So the Sabbath gives everybody an opportunity to shut down for one day. And that's what the purpose of the Sabbath is. Even today, we are supposed to shut down for one day just to catch up with ourselves, to focus on our relationship with God. People will end up starting to make form some opinions about who Jesus is, and that's part of what chapter 7's purpose is, to start raising those questions now in the gospel. Who is this guy? Later on in time, especially after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, it's going to become important for both the Jews and for the Christians, the Jesus followers, to engage in a very intense and meaningful debate about what is messianic symbolism. How do we know that the Messiah is the Messiah? And what is right religion? What is right worship? These are important issues that will come up. In Jesus' time, the Pharisees pretty much control the religious life. They're the ones who determine what is right and what is wrong. We're going to find out that as time progresses that people are various sects within Judaism, and that would include at this point the Jesus movement. Various sects within Judaism would have to determine for themselves what their values are and then live out those values, which is why eventually the Jesus followers will be removed from Judaism. The crowd thinks it knows where Jesus came from. They start saying, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? And they start talking amongst themselves. That word for murmuring comes up again. It's an active, kind of progressive, maybe even violent argument that they're having amongst themselves. And they say, who does he think he is? Isn't this the man they are trying to kill? Here he is speaking publicly. Have the authorities really concluded that he is the Christ, the Anointed One? But we know where he's from. He's from Galilee. And at this point in time, the people have some expectations about who the Messiah is. One expectation is that the Messiah will come from Bethlehem. John does not have a birth narrative, so there's no Bethlehem connection here. We can assume that Jesus is from Galilee, that area, and no more. On the other hand, there are other people who believe that the Messiah would not, where the Messiah was born, where the Messiah came from, would not be known. That the Messiah would suddenly appear from almost like out of nowhere and start revealing God's will and presence to the world. Since they know where Jesus came from, and it's Galilee, not Bethlehem, this causes people to wonder whether or not he could even be the Christ, whether he qualifies. So they think they know where he's from. We, the reader, know that, because John has said this and stressed it often, that Jesus is from God. And so that becomes more important than any birthplace or dwelling place in John's gospel. Gongizo is used, as I said, mutter or whisper. Actually, it might be violently complain. Many in the crowd are doing this. The Jewish literature does not state explicitly that the Messiah will be a miracle worker, but it is popularly believed that the Messiah will be able to do signs of wonder. In verses 37 through 52, Jesus says these words, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within him. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Now, these words would seem straightforward enough. First, their context. This is during a feast. During the feast on the seventh day, and even on the eighth day, the priest would take freshly drawn water and pour the water out as a libation around the altar. So when Jesus talks about him being water, he's contrasting himself with this act of the priest pouring out the water of libation during that feast. But there's a grammatical problem in this. This is a translation. The grammatical problem is where the punctuation is, because it could either mean that the water proceeds from the believer or the water proceeds from Jesus. Sometimes in the scriptures, when there is an ambiguity like this, then both answers are intended. But this has long vexed scholars. The early church fathers were divided. Origen, Chrysostom, Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine punctuated the verse so that the believer was the source of the water. Justin and Hippopolis followed the second punctuation, identifying Jesus as the living water. So this continues to be a thing. One German commentator said, it should be translated this way: if anyone believes in me, for him, as the scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from Jesus' heart. He said that's how he prefers to. So it could mean both, and that's something to contemplate too. I'm taking a view that is not backed up by a number of commentators, so maybe it's the easy way out. The temple guard do come back to the Pharisees. They did not arrest Jesus. And they say to him, the temple guard, no one ever spoke the way this man does. Now the temple guard, or the Pharisees, are angry with the temple guard. And Nicodemus points out a legal problem. And this legal problem will appear in the next story in chapter 8. The legal problem is you must have witnesses and you must have a hearing before you can take action against somebody. So Nicodemus is the only one of the Pharisees, or the only one of this group, that has actually gone out and talked to Jesus to find out something about him. None of the others have bothered to do that. So technically speaking, they are violating their own rules that they're trying to enforce. In addition, they do not have a witness that contends that Jesus has done anything illegal or wrong. So what they're doing is in and of itself illegal. So again, this chapter ends with a deepening rift between the Pharisees and the people and Jesus. In chapter 8, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and he is teaching there, and the Pharisees bring to him a woman caught in the act of adultery. And they say to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" Jesus bent down and was writing in the dirt. Then they ask him again, and he stands up and says, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." And at this point in time, they realize that instead of them entrapping him in a legal question, he has entrapped them in their legal problem that they brought to him. Because if any of them does take up a stone and throw at the woman, then what they are doing is admitting to arrogance and presumption. So none of them do this. They all walk away. Jesus says to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Is no one left to condemn you?" She says, "No, sir, not one." And he says, "Neither then do I condemn you. Go now and live your life without sin. Again, some irregularities in what is going on here. First of all, the scribes and Pharisees who come here, and incidentally, this is the only time the scribes are mentioned as a group in John's gospel. But the scribes and Pharisees who come to Jesus have not brought a witness. There's no one there that says, hey, I actually saw them. They say she was caught in the act, but there's no one standing up to say, I saw this happen. Not only that, you need more than one witness. You need at least two. 2 or 3 would be great. More would even be better. But no one stands up and says, I'm a witness to this. So that's violation number 1. The law requires witnesses. Number 2, where's the guy that she was having the affair with? That is also mandatory. As a matter of fact, the Mosaic law doesn't say the woman is to be stoned. It's the man that's supposed to be stoned. So their interpretation of the law is exactly what I just said, their interpretation. The man is supposed to be stoned. Now here's the problem with the act of adultery from this time period. Land was controlled through family name, and the family structure was contingent upon having a marriage that produced children who could then inherit the land. You inherited, if you had a plot of land, that would be passed on from generation to generation to generation. And so if you have a conception that is not part of your lineage, in other words, if a baby is produced from an affair, that means that a person outside your family will inherit the land. That's a problem, especially if you can prove later on, if that person can prove that that son does not belong to the father in question. So it was a big problem back in those days. And it, again, has to do with inheritance and estates. So the idea is that it was not the woman that was to be punished, it was the man. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22, and in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. So they don't have the man that she is allegedly having the affair with. Jesus does something, and I know William Barclay has said that when Jesus kneels down and writes in the dirt, what he is doing is he's writing the sins of the people that are standing there making the accusation. I like that interpretation, but it's not what was going on. I mean, it's a cool interpretation. But what's actually going on is in the Mediterranean world in that time period, if you come, let's say people came to me and made an accusation and I knelt down and was writing, or I just put my head down and I'm at my desk and I start writing something. It's to show refusal and disengagement. In other words, what Jesus is doing is saying, I'm not even interested in what you're doing here. You're not going to catch me up in all this nonsense. He's just not even interested. It's the ultimate insult to the Pharisees and scribes. They are persistent, so Jesus straightens up and addresses them. Notice he doesn't address the situation, the legal situation that they've presented him with, namely the woman, that he addresses them and their sin. So he says, let the one without sin cast the first stone. Has nothing to do with the woman. But he also knows that if they do pick up a stone to throw at her, that they will be admitting their own arrogance and presumption, to presume that you're without sin. The whole part of the Jewish faith back in those days was to acknowledge that you needed to be forgiven of those sins. You needed an atonement for sin, and to throw the first stone means that you are without sin, and that you just can't do that. So, and then Jesus goes back to writing in the dirt. That's an important thing. Again, it has to do with disengagement and refusal. Jesus is just very wonderfully insulting the Pharisees who have come here to trick him, to trap him up. The elders all leave, and Jesus does not speak of what is required for acquittal. He doesn't say to the woman, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to go put money in the temple box. You need to go 45 hours of community service. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, he says to her, go and sin no more. That means that at that point in time, her slate is clean. It's over. It's done. Don't do it again. So that's where I'm at today. That's where we're leaving off today. I had hoped to get all of chapter 8 finished. I was not able to do that, but I will have it done for next week and even more. So thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow I do have a really cool devotional planned. I hope that you'll tune in for that. And of course on Sunday we'll be live streaming the church service from the sanctuary here in Jamesburg, New Jersey. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye now.